Hi, this is our second video in the series of our talks on happiness. So in the first video, we spoke about the definition of happiness, what happiness is, so that we all have a crystal clear understanding of what happiness is and start our discussions from a common denominator. Now, in this one, we'll talk about the skill of happiness. Yes, happiness is a skill, just like learning to swim, drive a car, hit a golf ball, or read. We all can learn to be happier. And like any other skill, happiness requires practice and time. But it's a skill that can be learned. And to learn it, we have to know that our brain is built to change in response to the mental training. And therefore, it is possible to train our mind to be happy. Now, the famous psychologist Richard Davidson has done extensive research on the neural bases of emotion and emotional styles. His vast studies have included people from all ages, all income levels, and different cultures. His subjects have included individuals with mood and anxiety disorders and autism, as well as expert meditation practitioners with tens of thousands of hours of experience to still their mind. Besides, his research used the latest technology of MRI, various types, positron emission tomography, and genetic and epigenetic methods. So, what does his work show? His work, that has been profusely borne out by further research since then, shows that based on what we now know about the plasticity of the brain, we can learn happiness and compassion as a skill just as we learn to play a musical instrument or train in golf or tennis. So we need to know that the skill of happiness or building happiness rests on two pillars. The first is to make the outer world conform to our expectations. And the second is to manage our experience of our conditions to help it better conform to our expectations. Now, if I were to explain further, for example, being physically fit is an important part of happiness. So we can seek to improve our fitness by going to gym, by hiking regularly, by walking to work or eating healthily. So any or a combination of these endeavors aim to achieve our objective of enhanced fitness. The second aspect on our path to happiness through enhanced fitness is that we can also become happier with our fitness by modifying our expectations in accordance with our conditions such as age, health, environment, location, and income level. Now, a realistic combination of two will be the most effective one to achieve the fitness that you require to be happy. But it is a fallacy to think or hope that a change in our external circumstances alone can ensure our happiness. So many people around the world, every culture, mar their lives with a struggle for external goals. wealth, sex, power, in the hope that they will bring abiding happiness. They do not. Someone being richer, more beautiful, or having a more beautiful partner, for example, does not necessarily mean that they are happier than us. When we assume them to be happier than we are, we toil to acquire those things that we take as signs of happiness, as causes of their happiness. But what then happens is that realization of these goals leaves us hungrier without necessarily being happier, because we'll not be happier if we don't work on our internal world, and we'll continue to yearn for more. Another thing that we must understand in relation to the external world is, while it may feed off ego, which has unending demands on us, our happiness has nothing to do with what others think of us or what we possess. Our happiness consists in the quality of experience based on how we feel about ourselves and about what transpires in our life. So, what you feel about what transpires in your life is more important than what transpires in your life. So, while contemplating the type of experience that makes life happier, many of us fail to make a distinction between happiness and pleasure. Happiness and pleasure are correlated, but they are not necessarily the same. Expensive cars, good sex, even drugs may help us experience pleasure or excitement, but they do not necessarily yield happiness. Pleasure occurs when our biological or egoistic needs are met. That is not happiness. Pleasure results from an action, and therefore it is not a lasting state of being. Whereas happiness, as we discussed, is a permanent state of being. And also, pleasure and dissatisfaction can coexist for long periods. So, pleasure is an important part of a happy life, but it doesn't in itself ensure happiness. So, a source of happiness that does not necessarily need to be known to others for us to feel good and accomplished. I'll give you an example. You run in a marathon, you may not win the race, but the fact that you were able to complete the race despite excruciating pain, despite being injured, for example, will be a greater source of happiness for you than probably winning the race would have been. So that is a real happiness. And that also leads me to another point, which is that experiences that are the source of happiness are not always pleasurable in the instant that they are taking place, but they're always a source of joy afterwards. Numerous studies have established that happiness and the psychological conditions that enable it are very similar for different people around the world. So they may not be pleasurable in the moment, what must happen in the moment for you to be happy. Now, we have enough knowledge about happiness that by achieving the control of mind and by transforming even the most mundane activities into experiences that foster growth and complexity, we ensure a fountain of happiness that never dries up. Some of us may be genetically disposed to be happier than others, but overwhelmingly often, happiness consists in activities that require the investment of our attention. How we use our attention determines how happy we are, and it lies in the control to determine the object of our attention, in the ability to choose the subject of our mind. And that is the main distinction. Happiness is about control. It is not about habits or addiction. Happiness is control, addiction is about loss of control. So when we are completely immersed, our attention is completely absorbed in a worthwhile purpose, it ensures happiness because immersion makes us oblivious to unpleasant things in life. When our entire attention is focused on the task at hand, there is no room left in the mind for anything irrelevant to the object of our concentration. So, in the moment of immersion, all the disturbing thoughts that normally would pass through our minds have to wait outside. What drops below the radar of attention is the anxiety about what represents ourselves. So, the key element for an experience to produce happiness, as we have seen, is that it has to be intrinsically rewarding. What does that mean? That means it has to be an activity that is an end in itself. It is an activity undertaking not in the hope of some future benefit, but because doing it is a reward in itself, like helping others, learning is a reward in itself. And when we know that, then any positive activity can become a source of happiness if you pay attention to the activity, praying, helping others, learning, playing. If you pay attention to the activity for the sake of itself and not for its outcomes. So once we learn to interact with the object of our attention for intrinsic rewards, our life is elevated to a different level. You are then engaged and not withdrawn, delighted and not bored, up to speed and not powerless. So attention thrives in strengthening the sense of self instead of being consumed in the service of external rewards. You act with a solid sense of self. So we have seen that happiness is a skill, and it is a skill that can be learned and practiced by anyone. And this skill, the skill of happiness, consists in transforming daily routines into personally enjoyable activities that sustain happiness. When you do that, you find your work productive, enjoyable, and the routine of everyday life can become a permanent fountain of happiness. Thank you.